everybody, welcome back. So I'm going to try to wrap the nuts and bolts of this story in this final part 4, but you're welcome to ask questions in the comments if there are any gaps. But first, let me give a little recap of where we left off so far. So I've given some details as to how I came into the realization that I was even in spiritual warfare, the impacts on my health, my relationships with people, and my experience at work. I told you all about the Three Musketeers and a couple of other people they recruited to try to antagonize me, but like I mentioned, they'd already been let go from the company and were no longer an issue. That was a fight I was very relieved to have won. But I only won that fight to find myself up against a mega fight. And let me tell you this, when the demonic spirits went searching for a new host to access and afflict me, they hit the jackpot with this guy. They found a super demon in the flesh at the office, a master narcissist. This is an incredibly calculating, completely unhinged individual who is extremely smart and demonic. A horrible combination. But with all his brain cells, this guy still can't manage to achieve the things he wants most in life. That's how God lets you know who's God. So there was a new opponent in the office. This person was high ranking and actually helped me to succeed in breaking away from the Three Musketeers and their two recruits. However, this man turned out to be romantically interested in me, which he made very obvious publicly because he would just stare at me and say meaningless things to draw attention to the both of us in front of everyone. He called out my name and drew very awkward attention to the both of us during a board meeting, and I was sitting right next to him. But he said my name out loud and then said nothing else and just stares. I looked up and everyone in the meeting was just looking at us. At another meeting, he just started muttering something after calling out my name in the middle of the meeting and literally started speaking in gibberish. Just muttering in gibberish after saying my name. So I'm so serious, he just says my name and then starts muttering in gibberish and laughing. It was so embarrassing and awkward, so everyone started staring and I just changed the subject to move things along. He would stare at me during board meetings in front of everyone when someone was trying to speak to him, but he just kept looking at me. Then he would stare at me when I was getting off the elevator and he was supposed to be getting on the elevator, but instead he just stood there and stared at me like he wanted to say something, but he didn't want to be the one to initiate talking to me. So he just stared at me as I exited the elevator, I guess to try to get me to talk to him. I don't know. But it was in front of everyone he worked with, everyone I worked with, people who worked with the both of us. Everyone around us could see it because they were waiting for him to enter the elevator. And this was in front of people he reported to, people I reported to, and everyone we worked with. It gave the impression that he was focused on me in a personal way. And it was highly problematic because it made it look like there was something going on between us, which was highly problematic because he was married, which I would be notified about later. But it gets worse. When I realized that he was listening in to my weekly check-in meetings and I would be asked how my weekend was, I started making comments about my weekend to make it sound like I was in a relationship to put an end to any possible interest he may have in me, which caused him to go into a rage. He started getting short with me in emails with at least a dozen other people on the email, when he could have emailed me directly for clarity. But I was already feeling the push to leave the office. And on top of that, this man's manipulative behavior was also starting to cause pressure. So first, I requested to work from home. I didn't report directly to this guy, but he had the power to block my request to work from home, and he did. At this point, I knew spiritual warfare was about to elevate drastically. I could feel it. So I prayed and prayed for weeks. Really, for my last 2 to 3 months at this job, I was in deep prayer with God, asking God what I should do. And the answer was clear from the beginning. God was telling me to leave. And I wanted to leave, but I was scared. I still didn't know how I was going to transition into the industry I really wanted to be in, and I didn't know how things were going to work out. The fear of uncertainty. But at some point in your life, you're either going to trust God or you're not. You're either going to walk in fear or you're going to live in faith. I had enough savings to last me about a year, but I didn't want to just blow my savings, and I didn't want to ask anyone for help. As willing as I've always been to help people, I don't ever ask for help. But I know now how much God needed to break through that part of my mind, Because when God has intentions to elevate you, you better believe people will have no hesitation in asking you for everything when you come up. And you'll be so happy that you made it up there that you'll want to share it with everyone. Stop. Pump the brakes. Before that happens, you need to see this. Because when you get to paradise, the promised land, and everyone you know wants to join you up there, and everyone wants to ask you for a favor, you'd like to think everyone asking you for help would have helped you in your time of need. But when you're in fact crawling out of the ditch of spiritual warfare with nothing but the grace of God's Holy Spirit as your rope, ooh, girl. So the way God has me going through this obstacle course of spiritual warfare, people are going to know better than to ask me for help after all the cold shoulders I got throughout my spiritual warfare. And I needed to see that. I needed to see the true spirit in people. Everybody can't come with you to the promised land. So I quit my job, I started running out of money, I started asking people for help. People either helped me with a huge chip on their shoulder, meaning they did it resentfully, they did it with a resentful attitude, they would try to shame me for asking for help, or they would try to shame me for being in a vulnerable position. They would try to pick fights with me, and I needed to see it. It's like everything I was afraid would happen, everything I didn't want to believe about the people I knew, they turned out to be just that. Exactly that. I always told myself that if I was ever in need, surely I could go to them, as they could surely come to me, but that was not the case at all. So that's when I bit the bullet and moved back home, which I already knew was going to be a whole nother set of problems. But one, I didn't have any other option, and two, God had more information he needed me to gather. I needed to see the level and true demonic nature of both extended and immediate family and friends. I needed to see everybody and everything, and I most certainly did, and I'm very grateful for that. Now, my father passed away from cancer about 10 years ago at this point, but he always told us that if we ever needed to, we could always come back home. My father bought this house for his family, and it was always to be made available to us. But when I got home, a certain family member did everything in their power, including calling the police week after week to try to force me to leave. The first time she called the police, she told them she just doesn't want me here, to make me leave. And they told her they couldn't do that and that she would have to go through the court. They told her they couldn't remove me just because she didn't like me and that she would have to go through the court. I had a key. I was in my father's house. I didn't force my way in. She called the police again the following week and told them that I was using her washer and dryer and that she didn't allow me to use her machine. The police left. They didn't even address it. She probably called the police 4 or 5 times to have me removed during the 8 months that I was there. And throughout this time, she would try to get into physical fights with me, which I would not engage in because I knew what she was trying to do. She was trying to fight me so that she could call the police and say that I fought her to try to have me arrested. But I never engaged. Even when I would try to leave the house, she would try to bump into my shoulder with her shoulder to try to start a fight. When I bought groceries, she'd throw them away or tell me that she spit in my container of juice. One time she took all my electronics and all my belongings from my room, put them in her car and took them off somewhere, and I had to call another relative to intervene to get her to bring me back my things. I knew this family member had trauma, and I knew she had a very low EQ. She has no emotional regulation skills whatsoever, and she has the EQ of a 6-year-old. But I didn't realize the turn she had taken psychologically. I also didn't realize she had lost her license in her field of work. She was working a much lower paying job now and was also in the thick of a criminal trial which resulted after the investigation that led to her losing her work license. So all of this combined was happening within her, losing her work license, her criminal trial, her trauma. So all of this combined was happening within her own life, and she was taking out her nerve-wracking emotions out on me. But more importantly, this is when she started confessing to witchcraft, which I had no inclination about. Out of nowhere, she told me she would spend her last penny if she had to and that I would be dead. And when certain spells weren't working on me, she would ask me if I was taking certain minerals like magnesium, which I later realized are remedies to block the curse of weakness in the body. And then when I was at the kitchen sink, she came and sat at the kitchen table and started scowling at me and said repeatedly, "You took my life. Because of you, you took my life." I'm like, what is she talking about? I've just moved back home after losing everything, and she's talking to me like I have something she wants and acting like she's jealous of me. I can't pinpoint the exact moment I started putting it all together with respect to her being involved in the voodoo and the witchcraft, but I'm pretty sure after she told me she was going to spend her last penny and I would be dead, and she said it repeatedly, and I quote, "After this, you will be dead. Just wait, you will see. After this, I will do this, you will be dead. You will die. You will be dead." She would say it out of nowhere after just coming home. We were not having a conversation or anything. So, of course, after saying she's gonna do this and then I'm gonna die, and those constant questions about whether I was taking magnesium or other mineral supplements, things started to click. And when she would see day after day that I was still alive, she got so furious that she managed to get a court order and have me removed from the home. I even got arrested for a night. It was crazy. I got out the next day and realized things had finally hit rock bottom. But the good thing about rock bottom is that things can only go up from there. Because now I knew who was who and what was what. I knew how deep this woman's psychosis was. And I knew she was involved in my spiritual warfare, through the point of witchcraft and spell work. Even worse, she was inflicting it on herself. Her health was declining, and she was about to lose her freedom for more than a night. But after all the affliction and even homelessness she's caused, I have no pity for her. Not only for what she's done to me, but for the people who had to suffer at her work because of her, both to people she afflicted at her work and to other family members and friends. And I realized it was because she'd seen the blessings in my life. She'd looked into the blessings of my life. Through her access to spiritualists, witchcraft, and voodoo, she knew what I was coming into, and she was jealous. She thought I took it from her, even though God's blessings don't work that way. But for a person dealing with immense psychosis and selfishness, they don't see things clearly. I think those were the major nuts and bolts. She was also obsessed with tracking my finances and learning the constant state of my health. She made a lot of comments and asked a lot of questions that tipped me off and gave me hints that she was involved in the spiritual warfare and that she was involved in witchcraft. Oh yeah, and there was chanting. She was doing constant chanting. It was a lot. Too much to recount. But again, I was just trying to give you guys the nuts and bolts in this segment, and I'll reveal more on my channel as time goes on. I hope sharing my story helps some of you relate in some way, and I look forward to sharing more of my tips, guidance, and experience with you all throughout my channel as time goes on. If you found my content helpful, I hope you'll subscribe and tap the like button to help me reach more people in need of this message. Thank you all for your support. I upload my messages every single day, so feel free to tune in daily, and remember, the victory is already yours. In the meantime, as always, keep your heads up, stay prayed up. I love you all, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.